Public comments. Please remember, public comments will be kept to 3 minutes. We ask you to be respectful and don't address anyone individually. Do we have some more over there? All right. While she's bringing me the rest of them, we'll start off with Wally Paynter.
My name is Wally Paynter. I'm with the Tri-State Alliance. We've been coming here for 3 years to talk about some different policies. What has motivated us since January 2017 was because a 15-year-old LGBT kid committed suicide in front of Central High School. Before that, when we had concerns, we would meet with either Dr. Berger or Dr. Smith to address those specific concerns. Because of the incident in 2017, we made some very specific requests. Some of the board, some of the administration, quite a few of our requests did get approved. And we consider that to be making the schools safer for all students, or most students, and we honestly consider it to be suicide prevention. We ask that sexual orientation be added to your non-discrimination policy when it comes to employees. We ask that gay-straight alliances be instituted in your middle schools and your high schools, so that way in each school there would be a safe place for the LGBTQ students. We asked to have a contact person, when we had a concern about a specific student. Dr. Blue and Rick Cameron have done a good job if we've ever had a concern talking about this student is having this problem at this location. We also talked about the specific training we wanted your diversity officer to attend, and Dr. Smith was gracious enough to send the diversity officer to that training. That's what the board and the administration has done, to make a difference. There are a couple things that we haven't done that we're requesting. One is in your employment non-discrimination policy. This is from your website. We're asking you to add gender identity. To protect more employees that you do. The other thing that we're asking that you add that utilize best practices when it comes to transgender students. That makes the schools safer for transgender students. We consider that to be suicide prevention. We consider that to be a harm reduction thing. Just one more step to make the schools safer for those students. I have a handout tonight. One of them is a copy of your non-discrimination policy, for employees that talks about the different categories, and they're asking you to add 2 words to that. Then I looked for an Indiana example, and Hamilton Southeast Schools, that's Fishers. Fishers just added gender identity to their non-discrimination policy, and they just passed a policy that protects students that are transgender. So I'm going to hand that out now. I do appreciate your consideration and attention.
Mr. Shoulders, would you explain our non-discrimination and bullying policies while he's handing those out?
Thank you, Trustee Worthington. And first let me say, I appreciate, as I know the board does, the manner in which Mr. Paynter has approached this issue tonight. And I think there's no question that everyone in this room wants our schools, first and foremost, to be safe. Our policy on bullying could not be clearer and more non-discriminatory. It simply says bullying is prohibited by the school corporation, period. Students who commit any acts of bullying are subject to discipline, including expulsion. Applicability. The school corporation prohibits bullying in all forms. The school corporation will provide training and/or instruction on anti-bullying prevention and policy to all students and staff. It makes no distinction based upon gender or anything else. So I don't know how that could be stronger. And I also appreciate that Mr. Paynter has recited the many things you have done over the years. It seems that the issue, and if we all stay away from accusation and sensationalism, it comes down to words that Mr. Paynter would like inserted in your non-discrimination policy. And let's talk about that policy for a second. Your policy says it is the policy of the Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation not to discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, sexual orientation, veteran status, genetic information, national origin, age, limited English proficiency, or disability in its programs or employment policies. I think Mr. Paynter would agree with me that that policy goes farther than the laws of the United States of America, doesn't it?
Yes.
It goes farther than the laws of the state of Indiana, correct?
Yes.
It goes farther than any requirement placed upon these schools by the U.S. Department of Education, correct?
Though the city and county have had a gender identity.
The U.S. Department of Education doesn't require this, correct?
I don't know.
The Indiana Department of Education doesn't require this, does it?
I don't know.
Currently, the Department of Justice of the United States of America is taking a position counter to what you're advocating here today.
But we're talking about non-discrimination.
Right, and the U.S. Supreme Court heard argument in October as to whether or not the word sex, not gender as it's in our policy, but whether or not the word sex encompasses transgender rights. And we're all waiting for that decision because the courts across America are divided on this topic. You would agree with me on that, wouldn't you?
Sure.
So fairly, so that the board understands your request, you're asking the board to take a position that no Southwestern Indiana School Corporation in any contiguous county has taken.
It's because we're the leader. EVSC
And I think that's fair, and that's what you're asking them to be. And you know, when we say have students die, in April, Dr. Blue and Mr. Cameron reviewed tragic cases of teenage suicide in this community, didn't they?
Yes.
And there's no evidence that any of those suicides were related to any school conduct. The student in front of Central, for instance, wasn't an EVSC enrolled child. Is that correct?
You want me to answer that question?
I do. He was not a student.
He was withdrawn the last day of December because his parents said he was being bullied for being LGBT. On the first day of school in January, he killed himself an hour before school started to send the strongest message he could to EVSC.
Well, and that's the interpretation, but sadly, and it is terrible that we're in here over student deaths, but to say that we have a suicide problem in this school corporation over the past 10 years related to bullying on transgender issues is just not correct, is it?
I don't know.
I think that's a variance.
3 of the last 7 students, and we're counting this one, and Mr. Cameron and Dr. Blue counted the one that you're dismissing.
I asked them before I came down here, and they agree with me that there's really no evidence, nor has there ever been a complaint filed against this corporation relating to those deaths.
Because when a kid commits suicide, parents don't necessarily usually come out and say, and my kid was gay, and my kid was transgender. One parent did.
So you would agree with me that in the last many, many years, we don't have a record here. You've heard that, but
I will disagree with you on that.
All right, and reasonable people can disagree. But what you really are asking here, since the word gender defined really, as I look today online, the concept of gender can mean sex, but it really has additional connotations, more rich and more amorphous, having to do with general behavior, social interactions, and most importantly, one's fundamental sense of self.
But before it was not the same thing, but now you're saying gender is the same thing, meaning it will make no difference, so it won't do any harm, sir.
I'm saying that we use gender, not sex, in our anti-discrimination policy.
And the policy I have suggested for other schools, including Indiana, gender identity is a specific category, and that's what our request is.
You want the word identity inserted?
The words gender identity. We're not asking you to take out gender. We're not asking you to modify. We're asking for 2 words, not 1.
Gender identity is complicated. I'm quoting here. Some people, perhaps most, do not question their assigned gender, but others perceive themselves as belonging to the opposite sex. Still others Some of whom identify themselves as genderqueer see themselves as neither male nor female, or perhaps as both, or as rotating between genders, or even as not belonging to any gender categorization at all. Would you agree with that?
I don't even know what you're quoting.
I'm quoting from the American Dictionary comments.
I gave you all copies.
You did, and you've given us an example of Hamilton Southeastern, no school anywhere near in our congressional district. So, and what would, and so that we're fair and reasonable here, what would the word identity add to our policy, or rights, do you believe, that it would provide our students that they don't currently have?
Oh, no, I'm talking about the employment non-discrimination policy.
So as far as students go, you're okay with the existing
No,
policy?
we've asked for two things. You know, and one of the common things to do in an argument is you mix the two. When it comes to employees, we're asking you to add gender identity. You know, and that means that there's a transgender professional that's looking at what schools do I want to apply for. They're going to look for that. They're going to look for gender identity. And when they see it's not included at EVSC, they're not going to apply here.
Do you have any example of that happening?
You want an example?
Well, they would look and see that our policy says we don't discriminate on the basis of gender, and your interpretation of that word is that it's equivalent to biological sex.
I have not said that.
Then you'd be okay with gender.
I am talking specifically about adding gender identity. When it comes to schools, honestly, when it comes to best practices, you've lost a lawsuit from a transgender student. You know,
And that had to do with bathroom usage, and is that at the heart of this?
That's a big part of it, yeah.
And I'm fairly,
And
do you believe that students should be able to, I think this board needs to know what you're asking.
Well, and we were told by a board member, you know, that the administration was saying that people could choose day to day. Today I'm a female, today I'm a male. That's not the case. We're talking about people going to see a counselor or a psychologist or social worker. We're talking about people going to a medical doctor to get on hormones. We're talking about people who don't want to say, I'm transgender, usually when they're a teenager. They want to be stealth. They want people to recognize them as Bill or Susie. You know, and Bill's on hormones and he's got a beard and mustache. And Susie is on hormones and she's developing breasts. But with your policy, currently, you know, if they can't get to the nurse's bathroom, you want the kid that everyone knows is Bill, that has a beard and mustache, to go to the girl's bathroom.
In fact, that's not our policy, and in fact, those aren't the facts that in the JAW case, the case which you say we lost. That case has been dismissed and there is no appeal. But in any event, that was not the facts there at all.
I have a different understanding.
We were not presented with any medical evidence, any psychological testing, any kind of information, nor any parental request. You don't know what the policy is. The policy of this corporation is they take each student individually and look at the evidence and see what the transition is. A 7-year period. Am I right there?
No.
It's a path. You don't transition in the one day, correct?
That is correct.
So somewhere along that path.
In the past, when you've been quoted, and I'm over my 3 minutes, in the past, when you've been quoted, you've talked about the birth certificate.
We have.
That's what you have. That's what we've talked about before. You know, we're talking about kids that just want a safe place to pee.
Right.
We're talking about kids, and if you think about it, if you do the logic training, a trans male or trans female that doesn't want everyone to know that they're trans, regardless, because they haven't had surgery, they're going to go to a stall and close the door and use the bathroom, and then hopefully they'll wash their hands when they walk out. That's what we're talking about.
And I get that, but in terms of middle school, high school, it's your position, so that the board understands what you believe the word identity would help with, is that it would be the student's decision to choose bathrooms and locker room usage.
That's not what I said.
Tell us what it is that you're advocating for.
You need to come up with a policy. You know, we're talking about a student. You know, I would think, you know, you've got the resources to look at best practices.
Right.
You can look at other schools. You know, I would assume that you're talking about having a social worker, you know, and probably a doctor saying this person's gender identity is male or female, and then I think the school shouldn't second guess. regardless of what the birth certificate says. That's what my guess the policy would be.
And you
We're
would
asking-
say involve parents, medical professionals, psychology, social people in an effort to make that decision.
That's what my assumption the best practice is.
Is that what our practice is? Currently.
That's the first time we've heard this, ever. And we've been talking here for 3 years, David.
Okay, all right, well, thank you, and I hope you appreciate the conversation. Keep things rolling.
Well, it'll be interesting.
All right, next